The job was supposed to be 6 months. That was what Maricela told me when she walked me through the warehouse the first morning, holding a paper cup of coffee that smelled like it had been brewed sometime during a previous administration. 6 months, she said, and then they'd see. She didn't say, "See what?" I didn't ask. I needed the work, and I'd been told by the temp agency that placed me that asking too many questions during the walkthrough was the most common reason new hires didn't make it past the first week. The facility was called Borough's Mutual Field Intake. It sat on the back end of an industrial road in a town called Halverton, Indiana, which is not a real place, but is the kind of place that feels real if you've ever driven through the middle of the country with the radio losing signal. The building had been a regional insurance claims office in the 70s, a printer repair depot in the 90s, and a records consolidation hub for a now defunct credit union before Borough's Mutual leased it in 2009. The carpet was still the credit union's carpet. You could see rectangular ghosts in the conference room where the credit union's framed certificates had hung. My title was Field Intake Associate 2. I didn't know what the 2 stood for because there was no 1. There were 6 of us on the floor, me, Maricela, an older man named Ron Pulka, who had been there since the lease began, a woman named Devra who chewed nicotine gum and rarely spoke, a kid named Aaron who was finishing an associate's degree in night classes, and a floating temp named Beth who came in 3 days a week and seemed not to retain any information from day to day. We worked under a supervisor named Curtis Lim, who was visible mostly as a shape behind frosted glass and a voice on the speakerphone during Tuesday meetings. What we did, in plain terms, was open envelopes. The envelopes arrived in canvas mail totes from regional adjusters scattered across 4 states. Each tote held between 40 and 200 sealed manila envelopes, and each envelope contained a field intake report, a standardized form, 3 pages, attached to whatever documentation the adjuster had collected. Photographs, witness statements, repair estimates, the occasional handwritten note from a claimant. Our job was to open the envelope, verify the report was complete, scan the contents into the digital system using a flatbed scanner that was older than iron, and then file the physical packet in the appropriate drawer. The reports were identified by an 8-character alphanumeric code printed in the upper right corner of the first page. The first 4 characters were the originating region. The next 3 were sequential. The last character was a letter, a classification suffix that, according to the training binder, indicated the type of claim. A for auto, P for property, M for medical liability, L for life, and so on. There was no entry in the training binder for B. I noticed this on my 3rd day when I asked Maricela what B stood for, and she didn't look up from her own stack. She said, "We don't open those. We pull them out and put them in the grey bin under Curtis's window. He takes care of them." I asked, "Takes care of them how?" She said, "I don't know, Pavel. I've been here 4 years, I've never opened one. That's the rule." She said it the way you'd tell a new employee not to microwave fish in the break room. Not as a warning, as a small piece of cultural housekeeping. The grey bin under Curtis's window was a standard office recycling tote, the kind you'd buy at any office supply store, except it had a sliding plastic lid that locked, and the lid had a slot cut into it like a ballot box. You couldn't see what was inside unless you crouched and looked through the slot, and even then, you'd only see the top envelope. There was no label on the bin, no signage on the wall above it. It looked like furniture. That first week I dropped maybe 2 B suffix reports into the bin. I remember the codes. Vaguely one was from the Cleveland Regional, one from somewhere in southern Illinois. I didn't think about it. I'd been told a thing and I did the thing. The pay was $19 an hour. I had a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate who worked nights, and I was trying to save up enough to move out before my lease renewal in April. I was 29 years old, and the most interesting thing in my life was a podcast about ferry disasters that I listened to during my commute. I want to be clear about who I was before any of this started. I was not curious. I have never been a person who needs to know things. My ex-girlfriend used to say that I had the soul of a man who watches a movie all the way to the end of the credits, not out of interest, but because getting up requires a decision. That is the person who took the job at Borough's Mutual Field Intake. That is the person who, in the second week of October, started to notice that the B suffix reports were not random. The first thing I noticed was a weight thing. Most of the envelopes in the intake totes weighed about the same. 3 sheets of standardized paper, sometimes 4 or 5 with attachments, sometimes a thin packet of photographs in a clear sleeve. You'd pick one up, and your hand knew, before your eyes did, roughly what was inside. The B envelopes were lighter, not by a lot, maybe 10 or 15%. But once you'd been doing the job for 2 weeks, your hand started to register the difference before your brain caught up. You'd lift an envelope off the stack, and there would be a moment, half a second, less, where your fingers told you something was wrong with the count. Then you'd look at the corner of the report through the address window, see the B, and set it aside without opening. I asked Ron Polker about it on a Thursday in the break room. Ron had been at Borough's longest. He brought his lunch in a hard-sided cooler that he washed every weekend, and he watched local news on his phone while he ate, with the volume just barely on. He was, I think, in his early 60s. He had the patient, unhurried manner of a man who had outlasted 4 different management teams by being too boring to fire. I said, "Ron, the B envelopes are lighter. Have you noticed that?" He chewed for a while. He swallowed. He said, "Yeah." I said, "Why?" He said, "I don't know. They've always been lighter. Maricella's noticed it too. Devra has, probably, but she wouldn't say." I said, "Doesn't it bother you? Like, what if they're empty? What if Curtis is just throwing them out and we're not catching them?" Ron looked at me for the first time in the conversation. He had eyes the colour of a swimming pool that hadn't been used in a while. He said, "Pavel, I want to tell you something, and I'd like you to hear it the way I'm saying it, which is not unkind. There are a lot of jobs in this country where the deal is you do the work and they pay you, and nobody asks anything else of you. This is one of those jobs. The B envelopes are not your problem. They are not my problem. They were not Maricella's problem when she started, and they will not be the problem of whoever sits in your chair after you leave." He went back to his sandwich. I said, "But..." He said, "Also, just so you have the full picture, in the 4 years I've worked here, 3 people have lost this job specifically because they wanted to know what B stood for. One of them was a guy named Hollings, whom I liked. He was nice. He brought donuts. And then he wasn't here anymore. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a man reciting the weather. Then he turned the volume up on his phone and watched a story about a school board meeting in Terre Haute. I went back to my desk. That should have been the end of it. For most people, I think that would have been the end of it. Ron had given me the social explanation, which is the explanation that most adults learn to accept. The rule exists, the rule is enforced. The cost of breaking the rule is your livelihood, and the benefit of breaking the rule is curiosity, which is the cheapest currency a working adult has. I went back to my desk, and I opened envelopes, and I filed reports, cess, and I dropped 2 more B suffixes into the grey bin without looking at them. I did this for the rest of October, I did it through Halloween, which was a Friday, and which I spent alone in my apartment because my roommate was at his girlfriend's and I didn't have any plans. I ate a frozen pizza and watched a documentary about a container ship that ran aground in the Suez. I went to bed at 10:30, and in the night I had a dream that I was holding a bee envelope, and it was so light it lifted out of my hand on its own and floated up and bumped against the ceiling of the warehouse like a balloon, and when I looked at the ceiling I realized the ceiling was much higher than I remembered, and there were dozens of envelopes up there already, drifting in slow patterns, and one of them, the one closest to me, had my name written on the outside, in handwriting I recognized as my mother's. My mother has been dead since I was 11. I woke up at 4 in the morning with the dry, certain feeling that I had been watched while I slept. I lay there for about 20 minutes, listening to the heater click on and off, and then I got up and made coffee and watched the dark window over my kitchen sink until the sky started to grey. It is important for what comes later that you understand the dream did not scare me. It interested me. That was the difference. That was the first sign that something had changed in the part of me that was supposed to manage these things. The second thing I noticed was the smell. The intake totes came in on a regular delivery schedule: Monday morning, Wednesday afternoon, Friday morning. The Friday totes were always the largest because they collected the late week submissions from the Eastern adjusters. The delivery driver was a woman named Pat who wore a fluorescent vest and seemed to be on a permanent low-grade vacation from the rest of her life. She'd wheel the totes in on a hand truck, get Curtis to sign for them, and leave without speaking to any of us. The smell started, I think, in the second week of November. It was faint at first. I'd lift an envelope, and there'd be a thin, dry, almost mineral note underneath the normal paper smell, like the inside of a cave, or the back of a closet where someone had stored shoes for too long. Not unpleasant, not strong, just present. It was always in the bee envelopes. I started checking. I'd lift an envelope, smell it, and look at the suffix. A, nothing. P, faint paper, sometimes a hint of the adjuster's cologne or hand cream. M, occasionally a chemical note from the photograph sleeves. B, the dry mineral smell every time. I mentioned it to Aaron at the scanner, very casually, the way you'd mention a smell in someone else's house. Do you ever notice? And I gestured at the grey bin that those have a weird smell. Aaron looked at the bin like it had just appeared. Then he looked at me. He was 22 and had the watchful, careful face of someone who had grown up around an unpredictable adult. He said, I try not to touch them more than I have to. I said, the smell of the envelope. He said, the envelope. He paused. He said, but yeah, the smell too. He went back to his scanning. I watched him for a moment. The light from the scanner bar moved under the lid in a slow, regular sweep, lighting up the underside of his chin in pale green. He said, without looking at me, You've been counting them, I said. What? He said, the B ones. You've been counting them. I see you write a tally mark on your blotter every time you pull one. You've been doing it for like 2 weeks. I had been. I hadn't realized he'd noticed. He said, You should stop. I said, Why? He said that because the day Hollings got fired, his blotter had a tally on it too. Maricela took it out of his desk when she cleaned up after him. I saw it in the dumpster. He looked at me then, and his face had the careful blankness of a young man who was offering me a kindness and didn't want to be thanked for it. He said, Curtis goes through people's desks at night. I've seen him on the cameras. So just stop counting. I said, on the cameras. He said, yeah. The security camera feed plays on the monitor in the break room sometimes when nobody resets it. You can see him. He goes through everybody's desk. Mine too. He's not looking for anything in particular, I don't think. He's just looking. He turned back to the scanner. I went to my desk. I took the legal pad with the tally marks. There were 38 of them. 38 B envelopes since I'd started counting on October 21st. I tore the page off the pad. I folded it into quarters. I put it in my back pocket. I sat down and looked at my computer screen for a long time without doing anything, and then I started scanning the next envelope, which was a P suffix from the Indianapolis Regional, a routine property claim about hail damage to a roof. That night, when I got home, I unfolded the page and looked at the tally marks under the lamp on my kitchen table. 38. Over roughly 22 working days. Call it a rate of 1.7 B envelopes per day. Then I did something I had not planned to do. I went to my laptop, opened a spreadsheet, and started writing down everything I could remember about the B envelopes I had handled. The originating region is determined by the first 4 characters of the code, the approximate weight by feel, the day of the week, whether the envelope felt cold or room temperature when I picked it up. I had handled, by my count, 41 B envelopes total since starting. I could remember the originating region of about half. I wrote down what I could. When I looked at the spreadsheet, 2 things were obvious. The B envelopes came disproportionately from one regional code RPL4, which the training binder identified as Northeast/Special Districts. Of the regions I could remember, more than half were RPL4. The other regions were scattered, and the B envelopes never came on Mondays. Wednesdays and Fridays only. I stared at the screen until the cursor blinked itself into a kind of slow hypnosis. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed, and I did not dream. Or if I did not remember. The thing I want you to understand before I tell you what happened next is that I was not in any kind of altered state when I made the decision. I want to be honest about that. I was not sleep deprived. I was not drinking. I had not become obsessed in the way that people become obsessed with stories, where they stop eating and forget to call their mother, and grow a beard. I was eating fine. I was sleeping fine mostly. I had called my father the previous Sunday and we had talked about a leak in his crawl space for 40 minutes. I just wanted to know what was inside one envelope. One. I told myself very clearly, the night before I did it, that I would do this once and then I would stop. I would open one B envelope in the bathroom on my lunch break, while everyone was at their desks or out at the food trucks. I would read the report. I would put the report back. I would seal the envelope with a glue stick I'd brought from home. I would drop it in the grey bin like nothing had happened. And then I would never do it again. And I would forget that I had done it. And the small itch in my brain would be scratched. And I would go back to being the kind of person who watched movies through the credits. That was the plan. I had the glue stick in my desk drawer. I had identified the bathroom, the single occupancy one at the back of the warehouse, near the loading dock, which nobody used because the lock was sticky and you had to pull the door hard to make it latch. I had picked the day, a Wednesday, the 18th of November, because Wednesdays had a higher B incidence, and also because Curtis had a recurring 11 o'clock dental appointment on Wednesdays that kept him out of the building until nearly 1. That morning, I came in at 8. I drank my coffee. I worked through the first tote, which was a normal Monday residual mix auto property and 1 medical. No Bs. I felt a small, irrational disappointment, and then, almost immediately, a small, irrational relief. The second tote came in at 10:15. Pat wheeled it in. Curtis signed for it, then immediately put on his coat and left for the dentist. Maricela cracked the tote and started distributing. There were 3 B envelopes in that tote. I took one. I made a show to myself of choosing. I picked the one in the middle of the stack, the one I would have gotten anyway in the normal rotation. The code was RPL4-839-B. I held it for a second. It was light. It had the smell. I put it on my desk, under a P suffix and an A suffix, like a magician's sleight. At 11:55, I told Maricela I was going to lunch. She nodded without looking up. I took my lunch bag, and inside the lunch bag was the B envelope. And I walked down the long corridor to the back of the warehouse, past the silent flatbed scanner that nobody used anymore, past the storage racks where the credit union's old furniture was still piled under blue tarps, and into the loading dock bathroom. I pulled the door hard until it latched. I sat down on the closed toilet lid. I took out the envelope. I opened it. I'm going to tell you what was in the envelope, and I want you to understand that I am telling you because I no longer believe that telling you will make any difference. I have been told things since then by people I will describe later that have made it clear that the rule about not opening the envelopes is not a rule about secrecy. It is a rule about contact. The information is not what's dangerous. The opening is what's dangerous. You can read this description and nothing will happen to you because you have not opened anything. You are not the one who broke the seal. I broke the seal. That is the part that mattered. The contents are almost beside the point. But for the record, for whatever a record is worth, inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, not 3 pages, 1. It was the front page of a field intake report with the standard letterhead and the standard fields, but most of the fields were blank. The originating adjuster's name was filled in a name I will not write down here, because of something Maricela told me later, and the date was filled in, and the claim type field, where it would normally say auto or property or medical, contained a single word, hand-printed in blue ballpoint. The word was boundary. Under that, in the description field, where adjusters typically wrote a 1-paragraph summary of the claim, was a longer block of text, also in blue ballpoint, in the same handwriting. The handwriting was small and neat and slightly slanted, the handwriting of someone who had been taught penmanship as a child and had never lost the habit. I read it once standing up, and then I sat down on the toilet lid and read it again. It said, "Subject has been observing the perimeter of the residence from the tree line for approximately 11 nights. The subject does not approach. Subject does not retreat. When the porch light is activated, the subject is not present. When the porch light is deactivated, the subject is present. Claimant has documented this with 2 trail cameras, the recordings of which are appended to this report and have been verified by the undersigned. Claimant requests guidance under Section 14 protocol. The undersigned has provided the standard answer, which the claimant has refused. The undersigned is therefore submitting this report under suffix B for the determination of the Home Office and the closure of the file at this end. The undersigned will not be returning to the property. There were no trail camera recordings appended to the report. There were no other pages. The envelope was otherwise empty. I sat in the bathroom for a long time. The fluorescent light buzzed. Outside I could hear, very faintly, the sound of a delivery truck reversing somewhere on the lot, and the regular, slow rhythm of a forklift's warning beeper somewhere further away. I read the description again. When the porch light is activated, the subject is not present. When the porch light is deactivated, the subject is present. I tried to imagine the trail camera setup, 2 cameras, a claimant who had spent 11 nights watching, an adjuster who had driven out, who had verified the recordings, who had heard the standard answer refused, who had what was the phrase, "will not be returning to the property." I tried to imagine what the standard answer was. I refolded the page. I put it back in the envelope. I took out the glue stick. I sealed the envelope along its original line, pressing down hard with my thumb, the way I had practiced the night before with junk mail at my kitchen table. I held the envelope up to the light. The seal looked fine. I put the envelope in my lunch bag. I washed my hands. I unlatched the door, which took 2 tries. I walked back to my desk. I dropped the envelope into the grey bin under Curtis's window at 12:30 with 3 other B envelopes I had collected from my desk on the way. The grey bin made the small soft sound it always made when an envelope went in, a kind of dry sigh as the paper settled against whatever was already in there. I went back to my desk. I worked through the afternoon. At 5:30 I clocked out. I drove home, I made dinner, I went to bed, and nothing happened. For 4 days. I want to describe those 4 days, because they were strange in a way that I did not fully understand at the time. I was waiting for something. I knew that. I had broken the rule, and I had been told that breaking the rule had consequences, and I was waiting for the consequences. I went to work on Thursday. I worked normally. Curtis came back from his dentist appointment late in the afternoon on Wednesday and went into his office and closed the door, and as far as I could tell, he did not look at me any differently than he ever had. He didn't look at me at all. He rarely did. On Thursday, I expected to be called into his office. I wasn't. On Friday, I expected to be called in. I wasn't. The weekend came. I spent it the way I spent most weekends: laundry, groceries, a long walk on Saturday afternoon along the canal trail near my apartment, dinner on Sunday at a chain restaurant with my roommate, who wanted to talk about whether he should take a job in Phoenix. I told him he should. He had nothing keeping him here. On Monday I went back to work, and I expected that day to be called in. I wasn't. By Wednesday, the day after I had broken the rule, plus 1 full week, I started to allow myself to consider the possibility that nothing was going to happen, that Curtis hadn't noticed, that the seal had held, that the envelope had gone wherever B envelopes went, and no one in that chain had looked closely at the glue, that I had gotten away with it. I want to tell you that this thought made me happy. It did not. It made me uneasy. It made me uneasy in a way that I could not name, and that I now understand was the first sign that something had begun, but in a register I was not equipped to perceive. The first thing I noticed on that second Wednesday was that the porch light on my apartment building's back stairwell was out. I noticed it because I came home late. I'd stopped at the grocery store after work, and the back stairwell to my unit was dark. The bulb had probably just burned out. I went up the stairs holding my phone for light. I made dinner. I went to bed. On Thursday morning the light was on again. I assumed the building manager had replaced the bulb during the day. On Thursday night the light was out again. On Friday morning, on again. On Friday night, out. I noticed in a vague way, I noted that I should mention it to the building manager. I did not mention it to the building manager. Saturday I spent at my father's house, helping him with the crawlspace leak. I drove back late, around 10. The back stairwell was dark again. I went up using my phone. At the top of the stairs just before my door I paused, because I had the sudden, very clear impression that someone was standing at the bottom of the stairs behind me, looking up. I turned. There was no one. The stairwell was empty. The motion-sensing light at the bottom of the stairs, which should have activated when I'd walked under it 30 seconds earlier, was off. I went inside. I locked the door. I checked the deadbolt twice, which is not something I normally do. I went to bed. I lay awake for a long time. I told myself that the back stairwell light was a faulty bulb, that the motion sensor was on the same circuit, that this was a building maintenance issue and not anything else. I almost believed it. At about 2 a.m, I got up to use the bathroom, and as I was walking back to bed, I happened to look out the bedroom window, which faced the small parking lot behind the building, and beyond that, a strip of trees that separated my building from the next property over. Someone was standing in the trees, not in the parking lot, not on the asphalt. In the trees about 30 feet back from the edge of the lot. I could see the shape because the parking lot lights cast a low, even glow that reached just to the first row of trunks. And beyond that, the shape stood in the second row, in the dark, but visible because it was darker than the dark behind it. I watched. The shape did not move. I watched for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 90 seconds. I told myself it was a tree. I told myself it was a shadow. I went and got my phone and turned on the flashlight and shone it out the window, which of course did nothing because the window glass reflected the beam straight back at me. I turned off the flashlight. I looked again. The shape was not there. I looked at the spot for another minute. Then I closed the blinds. I went to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I drank the coffee. I tried to think about what I had seen, and I noticed that my mind kept sliding away from the question, the way your tongue slides away from a sore tooth. I would start to think about the shape, and then I would find myself thinking about something else, a podcast I'd half heard, a grocery list, a memory of my mother's funeral, which is a memory I usually keep folded up and put away. I noticed this sliding. I tried to push back against it. I would think the words there was a shape in the trees very clearly in my head, and then my mind would respond by thinking about a chicken sandwich. This was new. This had not happened before. I had a sensation, sitting at my kitchen table with the coffee getting cold, that something in my own thinking had been gently rerouted. Not blocked, rerouted. Like a road crew had put up cones overnight, and I was going around them without quite realizing I was going around them. I want to be honest. This was the moment I became afraid. Not when I saw the shape. When I noticed I could not think about the shape. On Monday I went to work. I sat at my desk. I opened envelopes. I scanned reports. I filed. At about 10:30, Maricela came over to my desk and sat down on the edge of it, which was something she sometimes did when she wanted to talk to one of us without it looking like a meeting. She said, "Pavel, how are you doing?" I said, "Fine." She said, "Sleeping okay?" I said, "Mostly." She looked at me for a long moment. She has a face that has aged in a particular way, softening around the eyes. The lines at the corners of her mouth deep enough that they're visible even when she's not smiling. She was 46. I knew this because there had been a small office cake for her in September. She said, "Pavel, I'd like you to come into the break room with me. Just for a minute. Bring your coffee." I picked up my coffee. I followed her. The break room was empty. She closed the door, which was something I had never seen anyone do before. She sat down at the round table. I sat across from her. She said, "You opened one." She said it as a statement, not a question. I considered for a fraction of a second denying it. The denial was already half formed in my mouth. She said, "Before you answer, I want you to know 2 things. The first is that Curtis knows. He's known since Thursday morning. He's not going to fire you because firing you doesn't actually solve the problem at this point. The second is that I am not angry. I am not your enemy. I'm telling you both of these things because the next 10 minutes of this conversation will be much more useful if you don't waste them lying to me." I sat with my coffee. The coffee was lukewarm. I had not had time to refill it. I said yes. She nodded once. She said, "Do you remember what was in it?" I said yes. She said, "D, don't tell me. I don't want to know. The actual contents change. That's part of how it works. What was in yours is not what's in the next one, or what was in the last one. The contents are written for the person who opens it, more or less. Don't take that too literally. It's more like they're addressed." She paused. She was choosing her words with care. I could see her doing it. She said, "Here is what I can tell you. The suffix B reports are not insurance claims. They look like insurance claims because the system that processes them needs them to look like insurance claims, the way a parasite needs to look like a part of the host body. Burroughs Mutual does not know what they are. I want to be very clear about that. Curtis does not know what they are. The Home Office does not know. Nobody who works for Burroughs Mutual knows what they are in any operational sense. What we know is that we are required to handle them in a specific way, and that the way we handle them is part of our contract with the regional adjusters, and that the contract has been in place since before Burroughs Mutual leased this building. The contract came with the building. We inherited it." I said, "From whom?" She said, "I don't know. The lease paperwork has a clause referring to ongoing intake protocols established by previous tenants. That's all the paperwork I've ever seen. I asked Curtis once when I was new, and he said he'd asked the regional VP, and the regional VP had said he didn't know either, and the regional VP would have told him." She drank from her own coffee. Her hand was steady. I noticed that and was grateful for it. She said, "The rule is we don't open them. The reason for the rule as I understand it, and I am giving you a folk understanding, because that's the only kind that exists for this, is that opening one establishes a kind of address. The report is a letter. The letter has a return address. When you open the envelope and read the letter, the return address now has yours." I said, "Mine." She said, "The opener's." "Yes. The thing the report is about, and I'm not going to describe it because the descriptions are different for different people, but the thing the report is about now knows where you are, not in any particular way, not in a way that lets it walk through your door tomorrow, but in a way that over time it can find, move toward, take up residence in the periphery of." She paused. She looked at me very carefully. She said, "Has anything started?" I said, "The porch light." She nodded. She said, "Anything else?" I said, "The trees." "Saturday night." She nodded again. She let out a small breath that was not quite a sigh. She said, "Okay. Pavel, listen. There are 2 things you can do at this point. One is what most people do, which is nothing. You go on with your life. The thing in the periphery does not, as a rule, accelerate. It does not, as a rule, approach. It establishes the address, and then it occupies the address, and then over years, sometimes many years, sometimes only a few, you become accustomed to it. People live with it. Hollings is living with it, as far as I know. He's in Tucson. He sends me a Christmas card. He's fine. He's a little quiet. The card is always signed with his full name and his full address, which is a habit he didn't have before, but he's fine. I said, "What's the second thing?" She said, "The second thing is more complicated, and I'm only telling you about it because you seem like someone who is going to want to know. There is a procedure very informally passed down by which the address can be reassigned. I do not recommend it. I have known one person who tried it, and I do not know what happened to her because she left in the middle of the procedure, and she has not been seen since. I am not telling you this to scare you. I am telling you this because if I don't tell you, you'll find out from someone else, and they will not give you the warning I am giving you." I said, "Reassigned to whomo?" She said, "That's the part nobody is willing to talk about. Reassignment requires a recipient. Some people have used relatives. Some have used pets, although I don't believe the pet versions work. And I think the people who tried them are lying about what actually happened. There are rumors of people who use strangers, but the rumors don't have details, which makes me think the people who did that are not around to tell the story." I said, "I'm not going to do that." She said, "Good. I didn't think you would. I'm just telling you it exists." We sat for a while. The clock on the break room wall made the small ticking sound of an electric mechanism, trying to seem like a mechanical one. I said, "Why do you stay?" She looked at me. I think she liked the question. She said, "Pavel, I am 46 years old. I have 2 kids in middle school. My husband works at the propane company. We have a mortgage on a house that is worth slightly less than what we owe on it. This job pays me $62,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a 401k match that I will need. I started here when my youngest was 2. I have not opened a B envelope, and I do not intend to. I do my work. I follow the rule, and the rule has kept me safe. The rule is keeping you safe too. The rule was keeping you safe until last Wednesday." She stood up. She said, "Go back to your desk. Work normally. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell Aaron especially. He's young and he'll do something stupid. If anything else starts at home, and things will start, slowly you can come find me. I'm not going to be able to do much, but I'll listen." She opened the door. She said, "One more thing." I waited. She said, "When you go home tonight, leave the porch light off. Don't try to fix it. Don't replace the bulb. Don't call the manager. The rule with the light is that it works when the thing isn't there, and it doesn't work when the thing is. If you try to override that, you make things worse. The light is the thing telling you where it is. Let it tell you." She walked out. I sat at the break room table with my cold coffee. I did not go back to my desk for about 10 minutes. I sat and I tried to think, and I noticed that the road cone in my mind had moved further out. There were now whole regions of thought I could not enter directly. I could think about the envelope. I could think about Maricela. I could not, when I tried, think about the shape in the trees. My mind would slide. I went back to my desk. I worked the rest of the day. When I left at 5:30, Aaron was at the scanner. He did not look up. As I passed his station, he said very quietly, without looking at me, "You did, didn't you?" I did not answer. He said, "Okay." I kept walking. The next 3 weeks were the worst weeks of my life, in a way that is difficult to describe because nothing dramatic happened. That is the part I want to be clearest about. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no apparition. There was no attack. There were no objects moved. There was no whispering in the dark. There was only the slow, methodical occupation of the periphery of my life by something that did not intrude. The porch light at the back stairwell was off every night. The motion sensor at the bottom of the stairs no longer worked at night. although it still worked during the day, which I confirmed one Saturday morning by walking up and down the stairs 10 times and watching the bulb come on and off as I passed under it. The bulb itself was fine. I changed it once, just to see. The new bulb worked during the day. At night, it did not. In the trees behind the parking lot, there was a shape, most nights. I stopped looking out the bedroom window at night after the 3rd time. I closed the blinds and I taped a piece of cardboard over the gap at the bottom, where the blinds didn't quite cover, and I lived in my bedroom as if the window weren't there. I knew the shape was outside. I did not need to look at it. Looking at it, I came to understand that one of the small daily transactions the thing wanted from me, and I had decided not to give that one. The dreams started in the 2nd week. They were not nightmares exactly. They were dreams in which I was performing very small, very ordinary tasks, folding laundry, paying a bill, walking to my car, and during each task there would be, somewhere just outside the frame of the dream, a presence that I knew was watching me with what I can only describe as patient interest. The presence in the dreams was not threatening. It was attentive, like a researcher, like a person doing a job they were not in a hurry to finish. I woke from these dreams tired, not afraid. Tired in the way you are tired when you've been at a long family event, or in a low-grade meeting that ran over. The smell came into my apartment in the 3rd week. It was the same dry mineral smell from the bee envelopes. It was very faint, and it was localized. It was strongest in the hall closet, near the front door, where I kept the vacuum and a few coats. I noticed it when I opened the closet to get my winter coat one morning. I stood there with my hand on the closet door, and I smelled the smell, and I did not move for some time. The smell was not strong enough to be alarming. It was just present. It was the smell of the envelope, which had not been in my apartment, which I had sealed in the bathroom and dropped in the grey bin and never touched again. I took everything out of the closet. I cleaned the closet. I sprayed it with disinfectant. The smell was back the next morning. I called Maricela. I had her cell phone number because she had given it to all of us during onboarding, in case we couldn't make it in. I had never used it. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her about the smell in the closet. She said, "That's normal." I said, "That's normal." She said, "Pavel, please understand. When I say normal, I mean that I have heard of this before. I am not telling you that this is a normal experience. I am telling you that I have heard from people who have been where you are that the smell sometimes establishes a foothold in a small enclosed space inside the residence, a closet, an attic, a cupboard. It tends to choose one. It will get stronger, and then it will plateau, and then it will be at that level. It does not generally leave the space it chose. You can close the closet. You don't have to keep things in it. I said, "Okay." She said, "Are you sleeping?" I said, "Mostly." She said, "Eating?" I said, "Mostly." She said, "Are you isolating?" I said, "No more than usual." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Pavel, do you have a friend you can stay with for a few days?" I said, "Why?" She said, "Sometimes when people are in your situation, a change of environment can slow some things down. I'm not promising, but the process of establishment is, I think, partly tied to the resident. If you spend some time at a friend's place, you might find that the establishment at your place pauses or even retreats a little. It will come back, but you might get a break. I said, "My friend, Daniel has a futon." She said, "Good to Daniel's. Take a week. Tell him you're having furnace trouble." I went to Daniel's. I told him I was having furnace trouble. He didn't ask questions. Daniel is a friend from college who has the rare gift of not asking questions. We watched basketball. We ate takeout. I slept on the futon. I slept all the way through the night for the first time in 3 weeks. When I came back to my apartment on Sunday evening, the porch light was on. It stayed on for 2 nights. On the 3rd night it was off again. The smell in the closet was back to its previous level by the end of the week. The shape in the trees, when I finally looked, was back too, although it was now slightly closer to the parking lot than it had been before. It had moved up by maybe 10 feet into the first row of trees where the light from the parking lot reached. So the break worked, in a limited way, and the break ended. I understood then what Maricela had meant about people living with this. You could live with it. You could go to a friend's. You could come back. You could close the closet. You could not look out the window. You could take a vacation in Florida probably and have a wonderful time and come back to your apartment to find it 10 feet closer than when you'd left. It would not eat you. It would not, as far as I could tell from the patterns, ever try to come inside. It would establish, and it would occupy, and it would observe, and it would wait. And the waiting was the thing itself. The waiting was what it did. The waiting was what it was for. The horror was not that something terrible was going to happen. The horror was that nothing terrible was going to happen, and that I was going to spend the rest of my life with a witness I had not invited and could not dismiss. In the middle of December, I started thinking about the second option. I want to be honest about how that thinking went, because I think it matters. I did not think about it in any heroic or villainous way. I thought about it the way you think about a small, embarrassing financial calculation. If I do X, then Y. If I do not do X, then not Y. What is the cost of Y and what is the cost of not? Is there someone I could ask to absorb part of the cost of Y on my behalf, in exchange for some compensation I can offer them? That is the shape the thinking took. I went down the list of people in my life. I did not get very far. My father was 68 years old, had high blood pressure, and lived alone in a house with a leaky crawl space. I was the only person who visited him with any regularity, and the idea of doing this to him was so immediately and physically nauseating that I had to stand up and walk around my apartment for a few minutes before I could continue the list. My roommate, whom I knew only superficially, and he was about to leave for Phoenix anyway. Daniel had not asked questions, and I was not going to repay that by routing the thing in the trees to his apartment. My ex-girlfriend, who I had not spoken to in 2 years, did not deserve it, and also lived in Oregon, which I did not know whether the geography mattered, but I suspected it did not. I considered briefly strangers. A drunk man on a bench, a specific kind of older man homo you sometimes see in bus stations. I considered it for about 90 seconds. Then I considered the kind of person who, having considered it, would do it. And I considered that the kind of person who would do it was not me, and would not be me even at the end of years of this, and that if I ever became the kind of person who would do it, the thing in the trees would already have won in a way that was much deeper than its current foothold in my closet. I crossed reassignment off the list. I called Maricela. I told her I was not going to try it. She said, "Good." She said, "Pavel, can I tell you something I didn't tell you before?" I said, "Yes." She said, "The procedure for reassignment doesn't work. I don't think it works for anybody. I think when people try it, what happens is that the thing reassigns itself differently, not to the person they're trying to reassign it to, but to a region of their own life, a specific person they love, a specific room of their childhood, something interior, and they don't see the thing in the trees anymore because the thing is no longer outside. I think that's what happened to the woman I mentioned. I think she didn't disappear. I think she's still alive. I think she just stopped being able to be in the world with the rest of us, because the thing was now in a room of her own head, that she couldn't leave. I'm telling you this so you don't think reassignment is a real option that you're nobly refusing. It is not a real option. It is a different way of losing. I said thank you. She said, you're welcome. We did not talk for a while. She said, Pavel, are you going to keep working here? I said, I don't know. She said, you can, if you want. The rule still applies to you. You don't open them. You drop them in the bin. The fact that you opened one doesn't make the future one safer for you to open, by the way. Each one is its own address. If you open another one, the thing in the trees doesn't get worse. A second thing comes. I have never known anyone to open two. I have known people who have considered it. I have known one person who opened a second one, allegedly, but I think that's a rumor. It's not something I'd recommend testing. I said I won't. She said, okay. I said, can I ask you one more thing? She said, yes. I said, the standard answer. In the report I opened. The adjuster said he gave the claimant the standard answer and the claimant refused it. What's the standard answer? She was quiet for a long time. She said, Pavel, I'm sorry, but I don't think you're ready for that yet. I don't mean that condescendingly. I mean that I know what the standard answer is. And I know what it does to people to hear it. And I think you have enough on your plate this winter. Ask me again in a year, if you're still here. I said, okay. She said, take care of yourself this weekend. Eat something hot. She hung up. I made soup. I ate it in front of the television. I watched a documentary about a lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland who, in the 1940s, had kept the light running for 2 weeks alone after his partner died of pneumonia, refusing to let the supply boat take the body until he was sure his replacement had arrived. The documentarian had treated this as a story of duty. I watched it, and I thought it was a story about a man who had been very afraid to be alone with what he had been left with, and who had used the work as a way to defer the moment of being alone with it. I thought it was a story about me. I went to bed. I slept. In my dream, the lighthouse keeper was standing in the trees behind my parking lot, in a yellow oilskin coat, and he raised his hand in a small wave that was either a greeting or a beckoning, and I could not tell which, and I did not respond. And when I woke up, the porch light was on, and stayed on for the rest of the night. This is where I have to stop being chronological, because the rest of it is not chronological in any meaningful way. The rest of it is the shape of a life. I worked at Burroughs Mutual for 2.5 more years. In that time, I handled approximately, by a rough estimate I made in a notebook, 340 additional B envelopes. I did not open any of them. I dropped them in the grey bin. The grey bin was emptied on a schedule I never determined. Sometimes it was nearly full on a Friday, i.e., and sometimes it was nearly full on a Tuesday, and the emptying happened, I presume, at night, although I never confirmed this. Curtis presumably did the emptying. I did not ask. I left in March of the 3rd year. I gave 2 weeks' notice. Curtis took my note and shook my hand and said, "Good luck, Pavel." And that was the longest single sentence he ever spoke to me in the entire time I worked there. Maricela hugged me on my last day. She told me to call her if anything changed. I have called her twice. Once when the smell briefly left the closet, and once when it briefly came back. Both times she told me this was normal, and both times I believed her. And both times I felt a small, irrational gratitude for the existence of someone in the world who knew what I meant. I moved to a different state. I will not say which one. I work now in a low-grade administrative role at a community college, where I sort student records and answer phones at the registrar's office. The work is similar to what I did at Burroughs in its rhythms, and in its boredom, and in the small, clear pleasure of finishing a tote. There are no envelopes at the registrar's office that I am not allowed to open. The porch light at my current apartment is on. It has been on every night since I moved in, almost 6 years ago. The shape in the trees is not in the trees here because there are no trees behind my building. There is a parking garage. I do not know whether the shape is in the parking garage. I do not go into the parking garage at night. I do not own a car here. I take the bus. The smell is in my coat closet. It is faint. It has not gotten worse since the 3rd week. I keep my coats in the bedroom closet now. The coat closet is empty. I close the door. I do not look out my windows at night. My blinds are down by sundown. This is a habit I do not break for guests, and the few people who have visited me have made small jokes about it, and I have laughed, and I have not explained. I have not, in 6 years, had a long-term partner. I have been on dates. I have not pursued anything beyond the 3rd date. I tell myself sometimes that this is because the work I do is not interesting to talk about, and the apartment I live in is not interesting to bring people back to, when the city I live in is not the city I plan to live in. These things are all true. They are also not the reason. The reason is that I do not know what I would tell another person to explain why I do not open the coat closet, and why the blinds are down by sundown, and why, on certain nights, perhaps one night in 3, I get up at around 2 in the morning and stand in the middle of my apartment for several minutes, with my hands at my sides, listening before going back to bed. I do not know what I am listening for. I have never heard anything. The listening is part of the transaction. Listening is one of the small things the thing wants from me, and I have decided that this one I will give, because giving it is cheaper than the alternative, which is to lie in bed not listening, and to know I am not listening, and to know that something on the other side of the wall is registering the not listening as a kind of disrespect. I do not believe the thing on the other side of the wall is hostile. I want to be clear about that. After all these years, I do not believe it wishes me harm. I believe it is performing a function it was performing before I existed, and that it will perform after I am dead, and that the function involves, among other things, the attention of one person at a time, and that I am the person it is currently attending to, and that when I die it will move on to attend to someone else, whoever opens the next envelope addressed to it. There is one more thing. About 2 years ago I got a Christmas card. The return address was Tucson, Arizona. The card was signed Curtis Hollings, with a full street address printed underneath the name, the way Maricela had described. Inside the card, in addition to the standard printed greeting, there was a single handwritten line. It said, "Pavel, if you ever find out the standard answer, please, don't tell me. I've gotten used to not knowing. CH." I did not write back. I never found out the standard answer. I never asked Maricela again. We exchanged emails for a few years, and then she retired, and then we exchanged emails less, and then she stopped responding, and I do not know whether she has died or whether she has simply decided that she no longer wants to be in contact with people from that part of her life. Either is possible. Both seem peaceful. I do not work at Burroughs Mutual anymore. I do not handle B envelopes anymore. I have not, since the day I left, encountered a single document with a B suffix in any of my subsequent jobs. I think the system that produces them may be small. I think it is possible that only one office in the country handles them at any given time, and that the office moves every few decades when the building changes hands, the way it moved into the credit union's old space when the credit union folded, and the way it will move out of Burroughs Mutual someday when Burroughs Mutual loses the lease. I do not know where it will go. I am glad I will not be there when it arrives. What I have instead is the closet, and the blinds, and the listening at 2 in the morning, and a single sentence in blue ballpoint that I read once, in a bathroom near a loading dock, in a small Indiana town I will never visit again. Subject does not approach. Subject does not retreat. 6.5 years now. Approximately 2,400 nights of porch light, of closet, of blinds, of listening. I have stopped counting the way I once stopped counting the tally marks on my blotter. I no longer need to know the number. The number is not the thing. The thing is the steady, unhurried, patient attention of something I let in by reading 3 lines of handwriting I was not supposed to read. And that is now simply the weather of my life, like humidity, like altitude, like the small, constant pressure of living somewhere whose climate is not quite the one your body was built for, and which you adjust to without ever quite acclimating, and which, in the end, you stop noticing, only because noticing has become indistinguishable from being awake. The porch light is on tonight. I checked just now by listening for the small click of the bulb, which I can hear through the wall above my kitchen sink if the building is quiet enough. It is on. That means the thing is not on the porch. That means the thing is somewhere else. I'm going to stop writing now, and I'm going to turn off the lamp by my chair, and I'm going to go to bed, and I'm not going to look at the coat closet on my way down the hall. I have not looked at the coat closet on my way down the hall in 6 years. I am very good at not looking at it. I am better at not looking at it than I am at most things I do. If you are reading this and you work in an office where there is a rule, you have never thought to question a small, petty, union trivia rule that everyone follows without explanation, I would like you to consider just for a moment that the rule may not be petty. I would like you to consider that the rule may be the only thing standing between you and an arrangement you cannot unmake. And then I would like you to follow the rule. That is all I have to offer. That is the standard answer as far as I am concerned. It is not the one the claimant refused in the report I read 11 years ago, in a bathroom near a loading dock. I do not know what that one was. But this one, follow the rule, is mine. I am giving it to you. Take it or refuse it. Either way, I have done what I can. The lamp is going off now. Good night.